I'm really excited about coming here and speaking. I get to talk about two of my favorite things in life, which is my faith in Jesus Christ and finance. Now, my purpose of talking is to try and figure out whether I can be a Christian, a lively, engaged Christian, and be fully integrated and involved in finance. Whether these two things, finance and faith, are compatible. And it's really difficult to see how they're compatible, whether they are compatible based on a lot of experience. And once you start getting involved in finance, you start seeing a lot of conflict. When I was learning finance, I started engaging in trying to learn financial heroes, and immediately I started seeing tension between my faith and finance. And for example, with people, I had a hero of finance who was Warren Buffett, and tried to learn everything there is to know about Warren Buffett and what he was doing. And he was super engaged in saving everything. And he went to money, was relating to money, and was wanting to make sure and save all of it, build huge wealth, and then give it all at the end. And that was kind of his model. And grow it huge through saving and then give it at the end. And then I had a hero of faith, George Mueller. Does anyone know George Mueller? Does anyone kind of? He did a much different strategy. He ended up never saving a dime. And he would give everything that was given to him, and he would just pray for money, and it would come. And he was actually a very good businessman. He was built orphanages all throughout England, and in the end was able to manage over 100,000 pounds in the 18th century, which was equivalent to a great sum of money. And so for people of faith and then people of finance, I felt a tension. Do I save all of it and then give it away, or do I just keep giving it away? What's the ideal? And with books, I feel a tension. There's some books out there that tell you give everything away and there's treasures in heaven, and that's the extreme way here. And then there's books that say make sure and save because you need to save yourself through saving, and that's kind of the extreme over here. You have full financial responsibility, and you better engage in saving as a priority, otherwise you're going to fail in life. And so I basically, my life, I've tried to figure out, all right, I love finance and I love Jesus Christ, and is there a middle ground between these two? I don't think I'll ever be Warren Buffett, and I don't think I'll ever have the kind of faith George Mueller had, and I don't think I should just give everything away, but I also don't think I should just save in such a way where I'm trying to save myself. I want to engage in sacrificial giving and imitating Christ. So the balance I felt most acutely when I was in an office with my boss when I was working at Brandis, and we had a nice, comfortable conversation. We were sitting in his office, and it was a nice shiny wood oak desk, and then the Bentleys were parked outside, and it was really comfortable, and we started talking about spiritual issues, and I decided, let me try and convey to him the idea of sacrificial giving, and let me see what he thinks about it. And I wanted to convey the idea that if you enter into dependency upon God, you actually engage more resources with an open hand, because God can give you more as you pass it along, versus a closed hand where he stops being able to provide for you if you walk away from him. So I was trying to kind of give him that idea of sacrificial giving and dependency as actually entering into more resources and provision. And his face, I never remember his face as I was talking. He had this perplexed look. It was almost like I was an imposter, and he couldn't believe. He's like, "Who are you?" And it was almost like I was a tree hugger in a some sort of milling, a logging company, or I was a hippie with tie-dye shirt walking in Wall Street. It was like two different worlds, and here was the finance world, and here was the God world, and my boss was kind of like, why are you even trying to merge these two, and why are you here? Finance is all about growing money, and here you're talking about giving it. There's just, and I wanted to really think about that, and being in finance, is that completely incompatible with being a Christian and desiring to engage Christ in the way that he engaged us by giving himself. I wanted to give myself to Christ, and that includes money, and how does that work? So today's talk is my struggle through this question and whether finance and faith can be merged together. So let me first define finance a little bit for you guys. Finance is the science of managing cash flows. So the whole purpose of finance is to figure out how can you best manage cash flows using predictive type of processes where you observe and then you predict and you build models trying to figure out, all right, if I have to make a choice between this project which gives $250 in a year and this other project which gives $200 now, which one do I choose? The one with more money, but there might be more risk, or the one with less money or there might be less risk. So you're trying to evaluate risk and return over time. And that's basically the science of finance, the purpose of finance. And there's two main assumptions in finance. One is everyone wants to maximize cash flow. You always want to do it. If you have the choice between more money and less money, you take more money. And the goal is to maximize. All your choices, you want to make sure and maximize cash flow. The second assumption is while you're trying to maximize cash flow, you want to minimize risk. So you don't just want to take on things that promise more cash flow if they have tons more risk. So maximizing cash flow, minimizing risk, that's what finance is all about. If you have money and you're trying to invest it, say, in ownership, for example, in a stock, and you want to try and participate in the ownership of a company, a finance decision would be, all right, do I invest in Google or Coca-Cola? And Google would be higher potential for cash flow, but possibly more risk. And then Coca-Cola would be a little less potential for cash flow because they've grown so much and they're already established, but then a lot less risk. So when you learn finance, you get to navigate these choices. And as I learned finance, I saw clearly, all right, I'm trying to maximize cash flow, minimize risk, and that I felt this tension as I'm learning this because as I was pursuing Christ, I felt like there's going to be times where this doesn't happen, where I make choices with money, where I don't maximize cash flow and I don't minimize risk. And one example is James, Peter, and John. When they were fishermen, they have their business, and Jesus says, throw your net out on the right side, and they pull up this huge bounty of fish, and this is the greatest amount of money they've ever seen for their business. And what finance decision do? They end up just walking away and following Christ as his disciple. And so there's a tension there. And sometimes within faith, there are two principles that butt against these two principles of faith. As a Christian, sometimes you see importance in loss. Christ in Matthew 10, he says, whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. And to me, that kind of conflicts in my mind with the idea that you always want to gain cash flow in finance. Like, how do you choose between losing and gaining? And so I feel that tension. And then there's just the riskiness of being a follower of Christ. You actually kind of run into more risk when you pursue Christ. And it doesn't have to be financial, but often it is. In some verses, 1 Peter talks about, beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you as though something strange were happening to you. So there's trials, there's things that happen, and Christ himself says, pick up your cross. And that's obviously not the safest choice to make. And a financial model wouldn't quite predict you to do that. And so I see the core concepts of finance, the core concepts of faith, and I'm wanting to integrate these two. I'm wanting to see, is there a way to redeem finance and make it fully engaged with my faith in Jesus Christ? And so in order to kind of walk through that, how to do that, I want to go back to the first time I struggled with money. And that was kind of the first time I was given a choice. And I want everyone to think back to when you were given an allowance. Or at least the first time you were given money and there was no strings attached about what to do with that money. You had money and you could do anything you wanted with it. And for me, it was kind of, I have $10 here, but it was a $5 bill that I got, and it was my first allowance. And that was kind of the beginning of my struggle, because here was a complete freedom of choice, and I had no guidance, no real guidance about what to do with it, because the things that I could do with it seemed good, all the different things, whether to spend it or to save it or to give it, like they all had something that would benefit me in some way. And no one was saying what's better. My parents gave guidance about savings and giving, but how much to save, how much to give, how much to spend, how do you choose between good things? And so that was when my struggle kind of began, was with allowance. And as a, I really started to try and seek the answer around when I was 15. And I got this book, and it said, the book title was How to Invest $50,000 to $5,000. And that just awakened this passion to try and figure out what should I do with money? What will benefit me the most? No one's telling me anything. Right now, I don't feel like there's any answer. I want to find that answer. And so really, I ended up pursuing voices who were going to give me an answer. All right, so there's spending. And these are the kind of the basic things I could do with my allowance or with money in general. There's saving, and then there's giving. Now, what's the primary voice in our culture, or at least in our world, that says spend? It says that's the best thing to do with money, is spend it. Can you guys think? Who's that voice? And they're saying this is the highest thing you can do with money. Entertainment? Like, who's behind that entertainment, though, in general? What was that? Wall Street, yeah. Yeah. I think we can kind of lump this into, say, U.S. culture, American dream. These are the kind of the voices that say spending. He who lives with the most or dies with the most toys wins, that kind of idea. Marketing professor. True. U.S. government is a big one, yeah. Yeah, the governments, they say that they want you to save, but in the end, they keep giving you these they structure your tax refunds so that you'll just go out and buy an iPod or a TV or something, just so you can spend money. And they'll tell you to spend money to boost the economy. But all right, so that's kind of the primary voice. And, the common American sees 3,000 ads per day. And so you're just indoctrinated with people telling you spending is what you should do with money. And so when I was trying to decide, all right, what's the best thing, I listened to the voice of spending and spent money. And to me, it just wasn't satisfying. I don't think that's the solution. That's not really what I want. I'll run out. And so then there's a voice that says saving is the ultimate thing to do with money. And can you think of the primary people that say that? What is that? Yeah, parents. The Ramseys, who I'll say are the kind of financial advisors. And then academics are big time into saying, saving, especially economists and things. So these are the voices that are telling us to save, and they use an incredible illustration of the power and the magic of compounding. And Ramsey will do this too. He'll show you just what it means when something will grow exponentially, and if you have some sort of over time, some sort of repeated payment over time, it'll grow to incredible lengths. So if you have a financial calculator, preferably one that's gold-plated, because that means it's more fancy. And they'll present this, and they'll usually have HP 12C, which Wall Street Journal did an article. This is very cultic type of calculator. Only senior executives have it on their desks. But yeah, so they'll do a presentation where they'll say, if you just do $100 of savings per month, and then you do it every month for 30 years, so 360 months, for 6% interest, say you earn over that 30 years, then you don't have anything today. After 30 years, then you're going to have around $100,000. So you've just put in $100, and that, if you didn't invest it, then that would just be $36,000. But if you invest it, because of the magic of compounding, that grows to be $100,000, which is a threefold increase. And that's power, and feels like magic. And so to me, this was a really, this to me seemed like the solution for what to do with money at a young age. And then what kind of voices are telling you to give primarily? Church, yeah. And is it a clear, nice, pristine voice that makes a lot of sense and real consistent? No, you have like, people manipulating, stealing. You have some people saying to tithe 10, and that's the law. You have some people saying, oh, it's whatever you want. You have just a real mixed message. So when I looked into the voice of the church, I didn't quite make sense to me. It was confusing. Did you have a question?
Another one is nonprofits.
Nonprofits, yeah. Yeah, that's good. So these are voices. And so at an early age, around 15, I decided that saving was the voice I wanted to really pursue, and that this is probably what money's all about. And so I started devouring every financial book I could read, did an undergrad in finance, then started working in financial firms, and was able to work under wanted to learn from great people who have done a lot of things in finance, like Bill Gross. I was a forensic accountant under his firm, and then Charles Brandis. And these people had out-earned the market and who were labeled as financial genius kind of people. And maybe if I learned enough and if I grew in finance, then that's what money was all about. And that would give me this sense that, okay, good, now I know what to do with this money, and it's an answer, and it's good. And so through that, and then lastly, as I was working in investments, I wanted to keep learning, and so I did the Master in Mathematical Finance. And in that, you get behind the mathematics of structured products. There's like mortgage-backed securities, and so you have a mortgage where you have an asset like a house, and someone's paying money for that in the form of a mortgage. And what if you took that mortgage, and so you are now getting that mortgage payment, and that's your investment. And if they default on that mortgage, then you lose your investment. So you gave them they gave you the down payments, and you gave them you bought the house, and so they're paying you the mortgage, and it's your investment. That's a simple investment where you have a lot of risk. But if you pool a bunch of mortgages together and create a mortgage-backed security, then you have a lot less risk now, because if one house defaults, then you are still covered. And if you pool pools of mortgages, then you have what's called a collateralized debt obligation. And if you pool pools of mortgages, you have what's called CDO squared. And so to me, this whole process, I was watching these structured products get built when I was an analyst, and I was like, I want to figure out what this is all about. And maybe there's some magic underneath this that can create the ultimate solution for finance. And you look at derivative products, and I love the idea of a short straddle where you sell two options and you make money if the stock doesn't move. I thought that was fantastic. Find the most boring stock out there, and then sell the put and the call, and then just make money if nothing happens. And so I got my master's in this partly just to discover, all right, is there magic within the math behind it? And obviously I discovered no, there's no magic, and it actually helped bankrupt our economy with these products. So that didn't quite work. And I felt this kind of lack in the whole saving piece, like there's something missing. And my faith in Christ started at junior high when I got into an accident. And I had a broken body. I was impaled on an iron rod fence. I fell 2 stories onto it, and then I was completely dependent and weighed 70 pounds at one point, lying there in the hospital bed. And my parents were people of faith, but it wasn't a personal relationship for me. It was just kind of what I did to please my parents. And then what happened in that hospital bed was I encountered God, and I encountered the love of Him. And it was so powerful to feel that I was loved when I had nothing to offer, when I was just laying there, and I was broken, and I wasn't doing anything to do. I wasn't acting or earning anything. I was just trying to recover from almost dying, and God, He saved me from dying. And so being able to feel this grace and this love that had nothing to do with my performance changed me, and then helped me have this new heart as I dedicated myself to Christ and decided, grace was something that I couldn't earn, and my sin was something that God paid for, and Jesus Christ came, and I wanted to respond to this gospel with a giving of myself to him. And myself, and it talks about it's your members that you give. And members are your hands, your legs, your eyes, and it's also anything that's touching whatever you have, things that are valuable to you. So I had this desire to give both my hands and what I was holding on to. But I felt this tension because saving was telling me you got to always maximize cash flow, you got to always minimize risk. And when I was wanting to respond to the gospel, I got scared that if I did truly give myself, that meant I had to give up finance. Because if you give away all your money, then there's no finance left. And so I wanted to try and figure out, all right, what does it mean to give yourself in the context of finance? And is there a way to truly be a disciple of Christ and also truly learn and grow in finance? And so I wrote a book about this question, and it's called Practical Generosity. It just came out. And so it's my answer to how do you choose between saving and giving and spending, which to me got at the question of how to engage, how to navigate this tension between finance and faith, because saving really is summed up by a desire to be financially responsible and independent, and giving is kind of summed up by a desire to become more financially dependent on God and seek a relationship where he's providing and you're leaning into his promises to provide. And that's a real simplistic view of it, but just this idea, every day I had this, every paycheck I had this tension. I'm like, all right, well, I want to save because I have future expenses, and I want to give because I want to give myself to God. I don't want to live my life completely independent of him. I want to be dependent. And so then I started to think, all right, do you navigate this by making a rule? A nice, simple rule, and I never have to think about it. So one rule is the 10-10-80 rule. Have you guys heard of this? So 10% giving, 10% saving, 80% spend. And I never was satisfied with that rule, just because what if you don't have enough money to, what if you're broke? The rule just goes out the back door. But then the other thing I didn't like was it's law, basically, and I didn't want to become a moral Christian. I didn't want to just, because if say I fulfilled that rule and I was really good at it, well, then I would actually become prideful in the fact that I was following this, and I would probably judge others who weren't following. I say, it's easy. This is all you do. This is what money's about. See, I did the 10-10-80, and it's dangerous to me to fall under the law. And and especially when I'm trying to do it so that I give myself to Christ, which is grace. It's so grace. And this to me felt like law. So in the end, what I found in the answer to this question was found by defining giving. And Paul, he actually clearly defines what giving's all about. And when I kind of looked at this verse about giving, to me it all of a sudden made sense. All right, this is how I'm going to navigate this choice. So in 2 Corinthians 8:7-11, Paul has this long discussion about giving, and he points out, and he really defines giving in three primary ways. So let me read the verse, and then we'll go over it. As you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in all earnestness, and in our love for you, see that you excel in giving, which is an act of grace. I say this not as a command, but to prove by the earnestness of others that your love also is genuine. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you by his poverty might become rich. And in this matter I give my judgment. This benefits you, who a year ago started not only to do this work, but also to desire to do it. So now finish doing it as well. So the first thing he says about giving, so there's three things he says about giving that I want to point out that are not necessarily you wouldn't expect. The first thing he says that giving, he says, is clearly not a command. But what does he say it was? He says it's an act of something, of grace. So when you give, if you feel like you're being commanded to give, you're not understanding giving. It's grace. This is an act that should be grace. And it's grace because of the next point that Paul says. He says that this proves that your love is genuine, and then he shows that it's a response to what Christ did. Because Christ himself gave so that through his riches, his poverty, you might become rich. So basically what's happening, when you give, you're imitating Christ and you're continuing his action, and then that is letting you experience grace anew. It's completing grace in your life. And for this very reason, at the very end, Paul says, this benefits you. Because if you experience grace, like I did at a hospital bed, I was sitting there, I felt loved, I felt this incredible favor, and it had nothing to do with what I did. I'm going to forget about that grace as life goes on. And then I'm going to start proving my love to God and trying to earn it. But then when I give, I engage right back into that grace again, because I realize the cross of Christ in a unique way that benefits me. So giving defined this way gives me an overwhelming sense that, all right, here's what I need to do. Here's what Paul says to do. I need to excel in giving, to excel in it, which to me is a much different message than the extreme people who say, give and you'll have treasures in heaven, or people who say, or I worry that Christ's going to come to me, the rich young ruler, and say, give away everything and follow me. No, I think in the end, this is the message that is for us, is that try and figure out a way to simply excel in giving and make steps so that you can do that. And put differently, this just means that make giving the priority, make giving the thing that you really want to do. And what ends up happening, and this is the really cool thing that happens if you do this, is that you save and you spend, but you do it in order to try and sustain your giving. So saving now is a tool instead of an end, and you do it so that you can sustain your giving, so that you can be a giver throughout your life and not just at certain times. And the analogy I love to do when you think about saving is a tree. So a tree, it's like a Christmas tree, but it's a fruit tree. Okay, so a tree actually has resources that it saves, rain and soil and sun. The purpose of that saving, though, is not to save itself against all uncertainty about weather. The simple purpose of saving for the tree, the predominant amount of its saving is to what? What it's hoping to do? Produce fruit. This is the purpose. And it's like an apple, I think. It looks more like an orange. It's an orange tree. So here's what I love to think about. I love to think about, all right, how can I engage in savings to help me produce fruit? It's not about becoming bloated and then I just dump all this fruit at the very end of my life. It's about how can I just be a healthy tree that's being fruitful. So I'm saving, and it's kind of like another great analogy is it's the way a farmer saves for the harvest. He has a storehouse, but it's just enough to get him through the winter. And his storehouse's purpose is to help him become a better farmer. It's not to help him not become a farmer. So we don't save so that we can stop engaging in community and work. We save to help us become a better worker and to help us bless our surroundings. And trees, they're smart. They actually overproduce seed and fruit, because if they overproduce, then they end up getting much more nutrients, and they end up engaging resources in a much more meaningful way. And in the same way, when we are able to be generous, then we're actually able to engage resources with people and make more connections, and we become a part of our surroundings, and we have more things that are available to us in our time of need. And you end up being healthier, and there's a lot of different things. I'm hoping in my PhD to help show that people who are generous and giving actually will save more appropriately, and they'll become less materialistic in general, have a higher purpose in money. And so that's what I'm hoping my dissertation will be. It's not set yet, but so anyway, I think to integrate finance is to say, I want to learn finance to help me become more generous. I want to make sure I understand to love, pursue, and know finance so that I have tools to help me excel in giving. Because if you're a tree that knows how to save well, then you can produce more fruit in general. And there's languages and there's things to learn about finance so that you can end up having a much higher and much more fun navigation of your finances. If you don't really know finance, if you're trying to save yourself, then you end up saving is delayed spending. So oftentimes, if you're just saving with no real purpose, you end up just spending because you're like, well, I'm saving to spend, so why not just spend right now? But if you're saving in order to create a more healthy giving lifestyle, so that you can give even when there's big needs that come along, so you'll have some. So say you're not saving at all, any kind of big need like an emergency or college or cars will blow up your ability to give, and you just can't give during those moments. But if you figure out, all right, let me just save in a way that I can sustain my ability to give and be generous, and there's not these big seasons where all of a sudden I'm completely in a tailspin. And that to me is a beautiful way of thinking about saving. And to me, it's a much more motivating way. And in the end, when I save, I'm always trying to decide, all right, am I using the savings to help myself become more generous? And so that is, to me, the integration between finance. Learn finance so that you can excel in giving. And through that, then, I really am excited about maximizing cash flow and minimizing risk. But the ultimate purpose of that is to be generous. So then you are able to make choices of sacrificial giving, because you'd rather give than save if that's your whole purpose. And if there's so anyway, the Spirit obviously needs to guide specific decisions. But let me open it up to questions. And how long do you want to do Q&A for, if there are questions? 7:15. Okay, great. Any questions, everyone?
I'm just curious myself. You talked about working for the big companies, and the way they do spend on the Bentleys and all the high-end stuff. Like, it's confusing to me how they can save and they make all the money, but they still spend so much like that too. Is there any sort of? I'm just curious. Like, it's just because they make so much they can just spend, I guess, say frivolously like that on some of those things, or what's? I'm just curious.
Yeah. Well, and that relates to like my experience. I worked room service right out of college, and we'd get movie stars come in. So Jim Carrey came in, and he was throwing down $100 bills for us to just clean off his table, and then he would buy these $3,000 bottles of wine, and we'd get gratuity on that. So we loved it when he came in. But it's, I felt sorry for him. To me, to be frivolous with money is kind of an affront to God in general, because that in the end is contributing to poverty, and it's something that doesn't feel good. That doesn't feel like you're producing fruit for the community. You're actually taking away. You're actually, to me, you're being a negative influence on community, and you're kind of living a life that doesn't have meaning. So if a company is doing that, in the end, that's I don't know who's responsible for that. But to me, I think of it like, all right, that's just contributing to bad things, and that just doesn't feel good in general.
I've heard the argument before where that sort of lifestyle, the person feels satisfied in that because they say, well, by spending, I'm passing my money along.
Yeah.
What would be your answer to that?
Yeah. So I benefited, from his generosity, quote unquote. But so my basic idea is, all right, he benefited the staff of the hotel and a few corporate people, but the magnitude of it was much smaller. And in the end, if you buy the bottle of wine that's $4,000 and then you drink just a little bit of it and throw it away, I don't know, that kind of decadence is, to me, you might feel kind of like, this is fun, but I've seen when you contribute and you invest into someone and you give them, your money, and then you're invested in them and you're praying for them, and then you see a change. And the amount of meaningful contentment from that and joy when you see your money doing kingdom work and helping people. There's the wee little joy of the wine, and then there's this incredible feeling like you're kingdom building. And so I'm not saying there's not joy or not some fun in what that was happening there, because it is kind of fun, the big steak dinners and the big, but you get tired of it. You get used to it. I mean, when we would go out and, you totally, there's the curse of adaptivity where everyone gets used to nice food and nice wine, and in the end, it's a little bit of joy. But I think if you're engaging and you're making sure that money's being used well, then you're a steward in the end, and it feels good that if you can give a good account to your maker and the owner of the money. So, yeah.
I'm curious about your thoughts about saving for retirement.
Yeah, I struggle a lot with that. I have a 401k, and I really liked. I did the minimum contribution, and they matched it. And so the tax deductibility of it actually meant that they were paying me. And so I was like, okay, let's just do this. And I wanted to be engaged in their investment products because I liked how they're investing. And so in the end, so I think about my retirement the way Mary had her jar of alabaster. So you guys remember that story? So Mary, in seeing Christ, she responded with this joy because Lazarus had been raised from the dead. And she took this jar, which is equivalent to retirement. It was a year's worth of wages. And most people, so you think of it like, $60,000, $70,000 worth. And she had that jar available if Christ wanted it. She was willing to break that jar and use it for God's glory and His purposes. And in this case, it was for His burial. And so retirement is neat if you can look at your retirement and be willing to take it and break it upon Jesus' feet if He calls you to do it. So it's okay to build it, it's okay to have it, but just don't think that that's your security. Don't think that that's your independence. Don't think that that'll shield you from anything. In the end, think this is a tool, this is something of value that I want to have for Christ's purposes, and I want to have it help me become more generous. How can your retirement help you become more generous? Because maybe it's going to help you be more generous when you do retire and you have money, and so now you can give it. The purpose of it should be generosity and not protection, because you'll end up suffering, I think, if you're trying to protect yourself, because God is our protector. So in the end, you should say, all right, let me make sure the mission statement of this retirement is for God's purposes, and so that enable me to be generous. But I still, one last, for me personally, I look at the joy of giving now and engaging in faith now, and then the 40 years from now when I retire. And I think in general, if I have like an emphasis, I almost want to emphasize giving now than saving for 40 years from now as a person of faith. But then I still want to engage, and I don't want to save retirement when I'm steeped in school debt. To me that doesn't, I'd rather get rid of the debt now, because debt grows exponentially just as well as savings. So I'd rather get rid of debt first. But I'm always, I personally struggle with the idea of the beauty of the moment and now, and engaging in faith now, and dependency versus, telling God, oh, I'll be in this or that city next year. And God's like, well, you don't know where you'll be next year. And so I think retirement is very needed. Our current society is not providing for us. We don't have family to rely on like we used to, but temper that with the idea that, giving now often will be just a great healthy thing that benefits you. And so if you went too far on the extreme of retirement, then you're just missing out, and you might not live your full life, or circumstances might be different than you anticipated. So there is this seize the moment kind of thing that is just, to me, neat, especially when you see needs right now. And if you're strong right now, God really loves it when the strong help the weak. And if you're just neglecting needs now so that you can be strong later, I feel like So all that to temper the idea, but retirement it can be fully redeemed if the goal of it is to be generous, and you're willing to take it off the shelf if you see a purpose for it that Christ is wanting. Okay, who was? I'm not sure. Okay, go ahead, and then we'll go.
Springboard a little off what you were just talking about there. If you were in a public sector setting, whether it's a elected official or a union representative, and you were working with a group of people, how would you employ this mindset into the biggest financial struggles that they're either fighting for or fighting against? How do you see that playing out?
Okay, could you give me like an example?
I'm just thinking if you were in leadership as an elected official, whether it's as big as a legislature or a governor or even a mayor, or on the other side, if you were, say a union representative, or you were leading, the charge for a collective group of people, how do you communicate and interact with them, knowing the needs and demands that, one, they've been accustomed to? How do you change that mindset? And two, how do you kind of put forward a plan to make this practical and productive for the community?
Yeah. So to give outside of the faith is really complicated because you benefit. I think without Christ, when you give, the main benefit is that you become less materialistic because you start seeing the needs of others. So that's going to benefit you. But you will end up giving and getting the glory for that giving because it's still humanistic and you're still going to kind of be prideful in that. So there's some bad to giving outside of Christ, but then I think it's more good just because you do become less ingrained in this materialistic world and you start to meet the needs of others, which is really like more community-based. So so in the government setting and non-Christian setting, how to encourage and cultivate generosity in general, is that kind of your question? I've seen, I don't know if I've given much thought to that. I don't know if I could be. I love the idea of a thriving nonprofit sector where people who are passionate about it are doing it, and then they're not being funded by kind of a faceless government. That to me helps cultivate people giving to those causes because they're not giving in the form of tax; they're giving in the form of more of a connection point between two people. Whereas if anytime giving feels like a tax, then I feel like that's less motivating. But I don't want to get into political because I think I'm starting to show my partisanship.
What are your thoughts about debt and how much debt individually people should have, and whether or not debt is even Christian or godly?
To me, so there's two kinds of debt. There's debt on depreciable consumable things that aren't growing in value, and there's debt on appreciable assets. So I totally am against any kind of debt on anything that's consumable and isn't appreciating. So like a car or clothing, food, anything like that. I really think there are other computer. You can always get a beater car. You can always get hand-me-down clothes. You can always get an old computer. And I think that if you're acquiring this debt that's growing and the asset itself isn't growing, then that's really difficult. You just kind of put on more burdens. I think there are times where you can get debt in those things. There's grace over all of this. So I don't like the idea of making a black and white rule. But in general, financial wisdom would say, avoid like the plague any kind of debt on consumable or on depreciable kind of assets. And you can always kind of take a hit on your lifestyle in order to kind of avoid. And if you have community, then you usually can find some kind of way to get around, like get something that's for cheap from someone that's getting rid of it. But then there's the appreciable asset. So the home and the college tuition are both appreciating. And so in the end, you can actually map it out. And if you do progress and you are price sensitive in some way with a home or with tuition, then that will grow and you actually will end up making money through that investment. And you don't want to buy a house, though, at its peak, and you don't want to engage in law school if you don't want to be a lawyer, things like that. That's foolish, but there is some. But in general, I think that's okay if you can map it out and the asset will appreciate enough to match it. It's just a burden. Debt is bondage, in general. You're becoming bonded to another individual, and so if you're not in a situation, in our culture, it just requires debt for so many things. So I just think the last thing I would say about it is you shouldn't stop being generous even if you're in debt. Like giving is a privilege and it's a muscle that needs to be exercised. And if you stop giving because you're in debt, then it'll atrophy, that giving muscle. And that is, you're just going to miss out on grace in general. And so I think giving is a good practice, even if it's a little amount. It's just a good thing to do, and it'll kind of benefit you. So you can, and I think giving, as you give, you become less materialistic, and which will help you not get into any kind of bad debt. So it should help you orient yourself towards saving in a more appropriate way as you are looking at the needs of others and giving towards those needs. And yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
You just mentioned that we need to practice that giving muscle every day, sort of.
Giving
muscle
yeah.
every day. What are some practical ways that, if there's anything that you're doing right now, what are ways to spend money to give, and what are some of the ways that you're saving your money to give in your individual life, and also at workplace? Yeah,
there's a kind of a process, the Romans 5 kind of road for giving yourself, which I love. And Paul talks about the fact that it's all about your identity. You're not going to be able to give yourself until you truly remember and know that you're in Christ, that you're a new creation, that you're dead to sin and alive in Christ. And if you realize that, and if you really count that to be true, not just know it, but then count it. And when Paul says count it to be true that you're dead to sin and alive in Christ, it's a counting term. That means to take inventory. So you need to look at your body, and there's an old body, and it's dead. And that was the one that was ruled by sin. And that's actually crossed off, and you can just count it. Like in accounting, you just delete it, and then, or you throw it off the shelf, and then you put your new self on, which is in Christ. So if you can physically throw away your old self and put your new one on, that's a step of faith. You believe that to be true. And then from there, when you engage in that identity, you present this new person before God, and then you make a financial choice. So that's the progression for me. So when every paycheck, I try and go through this. Who am I? I'm dead to sin, alive in Christ. Okay, now I'm in Christ, which means, His resources are mine, my resources are His. And now I'm going to present myself, and there's grace in this, incredible grace. And so I'm getting a paycheck. What do you want me to do? How much do you want me to save? How much do you want me to give? How much do you want me to spend? And so I make sure and choose what I'm going to do before it happens, before the paycheck gets deposited in my bank, because it's easier to make choices about it before you actually possess it. And so practically, it's neat if you can think about spending as an opportunity to be generous. So sometimes that means spending more if you're engaging in hospitality, or if you're engaging in, say you want a little bit nicer car so it doesn't break down so you can be with people, or say you want to spend a little bit less on groceries so that you can have more money for food shelters, or that's a neat thing to do too. So I love, I love trying to figure out really for spending to make this to limit my spending so that I can give the most. The most powerful thing you can do is keep an account, not future looking but past looking, and make sure you understand what's happening, and then show someone what's happening. And then that accountability and that shining a light will really affect your future behavior. And so if you don't know what's happening with your money and what you're doing, then often sin will get involved, and you'll feel like you can get away with things. But if you know, like, all right, this extra, let's see, what would be frivolous? What's a really frivolous thing to buy? Okay. This fourth, like, if you have to show your friend that you spent $20 on lattes in one day, that's embarrassing. And that'll really correct that behavior to me. And it's neat if you can present it to God, like this account. And so you can tell them, this is what I hope. These are my hopes. I want to spend in a way that will help increase my ability to be generous. And so keeping an account is what I do, I think is the most powerful thing I do to help change my behavior. And in terms of saving, I haven't been able to, well, I have savings, because I'm in grad school, and I've had unusual circumstances with my savings, because I had like grandparents pass away and things like that. But yeah, I just have my savings. I'm hoping will help me sustain my ability to give, and then I could save more. But then I also understand there's this great joy I have when I give, and I don't want to miss out on that. And then there's great joy in saving too. So I'm kind of weighing those two things, and I'm trying to decide. And to me, when I'm presenting myself as in Christ, then the choices that I make, I'm really satisfied with, and I'm really happy about. I feel like they've been sanctified in a way, and so then there's grace. I feel freedom. I'm like, oh, I feel like doing this amount of tithe, or I feel like doing this amount of savings, and really, if I make a mistake, like God's gonna walk me through that, and I don't have to worry too much about it. And my purpose, I'm hoping I can become more generous through this and not be close-fisted about money. Yeah.
Oh, I might be a little off the topic, but since we're talking about giving, what do you think about giving to homeless? Because it's homeless, like if I say homeless, I usually give, right? But some of my friends, my coworkers tell me, Julie, you're actually, contributing to the poverty and encouraging people to be homeless by giving them money, and also they tell me, like, what if they take your money and buy alcohol and drugs? So by that way you're encouraging them to stay, who they are or where they are, and with their status. But other side of my mind, thinking, like, Bible tells me to give, right? Especially those who are in need. So
here's the best way to think about it.
Like, then I give.
Yeah, well, giving should never be disjointed from action. So giving money should never be completely separated from time and from skills. All three of those should be together. So at where you direct your money is where your heart's going to start going. And if you're directing your money and your heart's going there, then you're going to start spending more time there. And then you're going to start spending more of your skills there. And so how I deal with homeless is I try and develop relationships with people. If I see someone regularly, then I get to know them. And then if I do give, I try and make sure it's food. I don't just give money. And then I spend time with them. I try and eat with them, or I try and get to know them, and then identify needs that they have. So I'm investing my skills, time, and money together. And same goes with church and nonprofits. As I start giving, I love giving to ministries in Iran and North Korea. And what happens when I start giving to those areas, then I start praying more, and I start caring more as I pray. And then I eventually will start wanting to go visit, and then using my skills to help bless the people. And it's like this incredible thing that happens. So I think try and avoid any time where you're just giving money without your heart and your time and your skills. Like all those should be involved, and that'll be the most satisfying way to give money. And then, in general with homeless, I used to just carry McDonald's gift certificates and bus tokens, because usually those are the two things, and that just will avoid them getting alcohol with money. But in general, I like getting to know them, and I usually wait until I have a relationship before I start really letting the money go towards them. So, sorry.
Okay, great. I have one question. In Professor Webb's class and also Professor Woodward's class, we talked a little bit about the idea of, we brought up the inside job. And you talked about derivatives earlier.
Okay, yeah.
And so my question to you really is, in your opinion, do you think that finance has any type of moral responsibility? Because the idea is, the goal of a corporation is to make as much money as possible. Mm-hmm. But where do you draw the moral line in terms of, whether it's secular or whether it's godly? Where is the moral line in terms of this is too much profit, or we should do something different with profit?
I know.
How do you see that?
That's a great question. Whether a corporation has a moral identity, or whether it's the people that make up the moral identity. I like the mission statement of let's make a ton of money, and in a sustainable way. You got to make sure and add that caveat, because you can make a ton of money in a manipulative way, and then you run out of, then all your customers leave, and then you're done as a business. So some people will argue that there's no way to make a sustainable profit margin if you're being manipulative with your environment, with your community. So that's kind of the capitalistic viewpoint, is that corporate responsibility in general will only thrive if you're being, or corporate profits will only thrive if you're being corporately responsible over a long term. You might be able to get away with dumping things in water or paying people less money, but eventually you lose as a company and you don't make as much money. So say you are having a certain sense of sustainable corporate responsibility, then I think it's fine to make tons of money as long as its products are helping people. And then that money, when it goes to owners, they can then choose what to do with it. You know, if the company is reinvesting it in its products, then that's just continuing to build things that people want. So Apple, for example. And but if they then pay it out to owners through dividends and things, and so Apple people now have these dividends they're getting because Apple has too much money. And so if you, they have more money than the U.S. government, and so if you get this big dividend of cash as an owner, now you can choose what to do with it. You can either reinvest it in another company or you can give it all away. And so that's where the moral decision is. It's not in the fact that they're making money on making a product. So does that make sense?
It does, but in the situation with derivatives, I mean, basically the companies were betting against themselves. So you have AIG and other companies playing both sides of it. Mm-hmm. The morality in that, it's like,
So yeah, investment bankers can get slimy. Yeah, and they didn't understand the product, and they thought the mathematical model was foolproof, and they didn't really understand the assumptions behind it, and it broke. It was a model that broke because they hadn't tested it, and it wasn't properly. The sensitivity analysis they didn't understand what happens when liquidity dries up. And there's no math behind that. If no one wants to trade, then there's no pricing data, and then no one modeled that, and there's no way to model that, and so that's what happened. And so yeah, the idea that there's certain industries that middlemen in general, I think, tend to be slimy. People who are in between, who are doing transactions, there's no real product that they're giving. That's a widget that they make. In the end, it's a transaction they're doing that's based on knowledge that they're kind of coveting. So I think there's a lot of room for problems. Agents and brokers and investment bankers and insurance, and you see a lot of corruption in those areas. But I don't think it means that the structure of a corporation is broken. Because if it's a normal product kind of thing that's helping people, an energy company or a consumer product company, then I feel like if the management truly wanted a sustainable business model, they would make a product that would help people and would engage corporate responsibility in a mature way. And then as society evolves, then they can adapt, as you've seen. Now more people can make green kind of businesses because the technology is there, but it wasn't there before. So that's kind of evolved. And then corporate responsibility, it's really helpful to have good shareholder rights so that as an owner you can go in there and change things. Like if right now you own Apple and you don't think it's right to pay the Malaysian workers a certain price, then you can go in and vote and make sure and put pressure on them. So if that's healthy, then I think there's checks and balances for a moral, social corporation. But I feel like I'm getting out of my area, so I hope I haven't said anything to offend any of the other professors. But yeah, did you have a question?
I had a similar question. I just wanted to know your thoughts on corporate giving.
Corporate giving? Oh yeah, I kind of don't like it. Yeah, I kind of would rather have the corporations stick with what they're good at doing, and then give any extra back to the shareholder, to the owners who have invested or risked their capital. And unless for some reason the corporate giving helps their business, with, like Chick-fil-A, the way they engage their community through giving. They'll have like a military day, and they'll have all sorts of giveaways. I think that actually helps them increase their revenue. But if they're just taking net profit and giving it to, say, building wells in Africa or something, I feel like I would rather make that choice as an owner than have them make that choice. So that's where I'm at. Yeah. Did I offend anyone with that? but I don't know. Yeah.
So in order to give, you have to save and invest. Now, for an individual investor, what's the best way to learn how to invest your money?
Yeah, so I've been really addressing the heart issue of everything. Now, the skills issue. So I wanted a mission statement. So here's the mission statement. Let me have everything work towards giving, and now let me engage in. So spending, I think, is engaged best by keeping an account. So you make sure and understand how you're spending, because everyone knows how to spend well. So saving, though, not many people know, and that's why you need to learn finance. That's what will get you the knowledge and the skills to understand how to save. And so take that finance course, but then also there's so many books, and that's how I learned in high school. When I first started engaging in finance, I used to come home and I'd have huge stacks of books, and then it to me is so neat because it's so practical. You can engage right now. You can open up a brokerage account anywhere or a money market account, and you only need, say, $50 to do something, and you can just start learning. I just started investing and learning, and that's the best way is just to jump in and.
Do you have any of that in your book? Just curious.
Oh, I don't have many skill stuff. Right now, this is heart issue, trying to see how people think and changing that. And then my next thing I'm doing is the skills, where I just want to give people the practical knowledge. But it changes with time, so I didn't want to focus on that right now. And but that's what everyone wants to know usually is what exactly to do. And but yeah, if you ever have questions, you can ask me. Although I don't know if I'm, I don't know how helpful I'd be.
As a Christian, you talk about saving and kind of giving and stewardship. How do you reconcile when you are saving and maybe investing in companies of stocks, reconciling your beliefs with those companies? I mean, are you fine as long as they're profitable, or do you have a problem as a believer investing in a company whose worldview and the choices they make really don't line up with the Bible? And
so it's hard because there's degrees of separation between certain things, problematic things. So, for example, investing in ExxonMobil. Warren Buffett had a long talk about this in one of his newsletters. Is it moral to invest in ExxonMobil if through their drilling in Sudan they end up indirectly funding the Janjaweed, who are then massacring Christians? So does that mean now you can't invest in ExxonMobil because of this indirect thing they're doing? Do you just sell ExxonMobil because you don't want them drilling in the South Sudan? So that's like a couple degrees. And then there's the more direct ones where, say Ford is directly contributing to homosexual groups, or Chick-fil-A directly contributing to Focus on the Family. I think in terms of, and this is called shareholder activism, whether or not you should, try and change behavior through engaging as a shareholder, either by doing a proxy fight where you try and get votes on the proxy where the shareholders vote and kick out management or make them do something, or you just vote with your feet where you sell it and don't buy it. And so I think everyone's moral compass in that area and conviction is different. And Warren Buffett's thought was, all right, every company has some kind of hand in something bad. It's like everyone's related to Kevin Bacon and within 6 degrees, right? I think every company has some kind of degree of separation to something bad. So it's just how many degrees are you willing to have? So I don't think, so I had to value a Japanese tobacco company once. And so that was a moral kind of dilemma, and I definitely wouldn't invest in it because I feel like a tobacco company is not being good with society, but is just valuing one, is that bad? And so in the end, you have to kind of just bring it to the Lord and see what your conviction is. Is investing in ExxonMobil, is this bad? Like the fact that they're drilling in the South Sudan, they're not, they're not paying the Janjaweed. It's just the fact that they're working there helps the South Sudan. And so it's like, if they don't drill, then someone else will, but then maybe that's good enough to not invest. I never had to make that choice, but what if you're investing in a mutual fund that has ExxonMobil? Do you not do the mutual fund? It's tough. The only thing I can say, because I don't think a rule is the right way to go, is just to just pray and see whether you feel convicted. And certain things are, I think, more clear, but that kind of thing is less clear. And then you can get into funds that are socially conscious. There's SRI funds, socially responsible investing, and those you can make sure and not have any mutual funds that own any stocks that are in firearms or in gambling or in tobacco, all these socially bad things. And so as a shareholder, you can make steps, kind of like when you recycle or when you compost or something. But it depends on how you feel about it.
So your perspective is how far you're separated from some of those.
Yeah. So like if I could choose between GM and Ford, I'd probably just choose Ford or choose GM just because it's an easier choice for me. But to me, that's not black and white. That's like, and then to look into everything that they're doing, GM, they might be doing something I don't like too, and it's tough. If they're directly funding something, I'll definitely want to take a stand on certain things. But if they're indirectly doing something, so like Apple, for example, the fact that they're paying workers less, I don't think is too bad, because I think usually those people, they're much more impoverished without working for Apple than with. But obviously, I don't know. I might be speaking out of ignorance. So if someone knows better, then that's okay. I'm not as familiar with that. But yeah, I think as an investor, you are responsible to look into your effect of your investment, whether that's helping society or hurting it, and whether it's consistent with your values or not. And that means you're being a responsible investor. But sometimes if it's a mutual fund that owns 300 companies, it's like, that's not going to help. So.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.